Achewillow. Chapter 15. A Light for Hearts Old and New. Where are they? I must have asked the question a dozen times by now. I've asked pleadingly and angrily. I've begged and I've demanded. I've turned the Achewillow Cafe upside down, and I've even run out back, banging on the dumpster to ask the raccoons if they've seen them. Pete and Fred. I don't know exactly what I was expecting. I guess I got so caught up in the idea of figuring out the Donsolites that I assumed once they could be summoned, Pete and Fred would appear right alongside them. The lights took them, after all. Shouldn't they bring them back? It's a naive line of thinking, the kind of presumption that amateur sorcerers in movies make, summoning a demon or evil spirit thinking that the entity would be instantly bound to them. But I'm more than a teenager with a Ouija board. The powers I'm playing with are real, and the entities I'm toying around with are dangerous. 170 years ago, my ancestor summoned these lights for her granddaughter. Last week, they finally took their toll in the form of my two friends. Now, I've summoned them again. What payment will they extract this time? And when?
Miriam,
Annabelle says with a soothing calm.
We don't know that it didn't work.
She puts down a mug of steaming brown liquid in front of me. I can smell the potent aroma of coffee coming from it, but with something else along for the ride. Something sweet but mischievous. Like an old friend back from my student years. Is it here to ease my nerves or play some trick on me? Annabelle put rum in this coffee. Rum, you old bastard. What have you got up your sleeve? I take a sip. The warmth, both its heat and the sweet ethanol embrace, does me good. It doesn't so much quiet my anxiety as muffle it, as if heard from behind a door. I've gone through this cafe from top to bottom 6 times. I know this place. If they were here, I'd have found them. Damn it, look around. It's not that big of a coffee shop. Right, says Thomas, who's been unusually quiet since the lights came and went. But you're thinking of it in too limited a fashion. You need to expand your mind and break free of the bonds of conventional thinking. I stare at him, deadpan, as if he were an idiot. Which, to be fair, is what he sounds like. What is he talking about? We summon the lights here, he explains, so slowly it might pass for condescension. But Frederick and Petunia disappeared there. I don't think my mind is expanded enough to follow his line of thought, or I'm too exhausted to see all the breadcrumbs. I know I've made my peace with Thomas, but damn if it's not the most infuriating feeling to have him be more clear-headed than I am. Fortunately, either by luck or through incredible foresight, Annabelle has provided me the elixir to both problems. Staring down Thomas Sinclair as if I were issuing a challenge, I drink the scalding hot coffee and rum. The spiked drink first burns my mouth, then blisters my throat before boiling my stomach from the inside. The rum feels like it's hitting my veins almost instantly, and my brain only a moment later. Between almost immediately wanting to vomit and my tongue damn near melting right out of my mouth, this wasn't my brightest idea. Yet, despite the pain, or perhaps because of it, it hits me what Thomas is trying to say. They're in the forest, I say, surprised my speech is neither slurred nor garbled by third-degree burns. Even if we got the lights to appear here, Pete and Fred wouldn't necessarily return here.
Assuming they've returned at all.
The sobering thought is brought to us by Annabelle, who picks up the now empty mug she served me. It's the opposite of her earlier hopeful message. I guess she's trying to keep me balanced, neither giving up nor setting my expectations too high. Wise of her to do so, I suppose. So, assuming they did come back, I say, which is somewhat jumping to conclusions, I accept that. and they reappeared in the woods where the dances were held. We just have to wait until they make their way home? Is it that easy? Or that hard? Well, I'll be glad if our little cooking ritual had been a success and all we have left to do is pass the time until Fred and Pete's return. The wait itself would be pure torture. What if they haven't made it back? How long do we wait before giving up?
When UFO abductees come back from their ordeal,
Thomas answers my question with one of his patented non sequiturs.
They're often disoriented and suffer from memory loss. Some are dehydrated and malnourished after days without food or drink while being experimented on. We shouldn't assume that Fred and Petunia are capable of making their way home. It's a long, hard walk back from those woods, and I speak from experience when I say that it's very easy to get lost, too.
I'm almost impressed with just how much is wrong with everything Thomas managed to stuff into one statement. First of all, I say, the woods aren't that hard to navigate. You were just unfortunate when you got lost. Second, Pete and Fred didn't get taken into outer space.
Most UFOs don't come from space,
he says, outraged that I would even suggest such a thing.
Aliens are, for the most part, extra-dimensional beings. Traveling from distant stars would require faster-than-light travel, and that's physically impossible. UFOs are interdimensional ships. Being taken into some kind of magical realm by fairy lights isn't that much different when you look at it that way.
Suddenly, his eyes grow to twice their original size, becoming so large and round that the little man looks more toad than human for a moment.
Oh my God,
he says.
Are the Donsalites UFOs? Are we dealing with aliens?
I try to stare him down or browbeat him into realizing how dumb he sounds, but his eyes have drifted up to the ceiling, as if the canned light fixtures were flying saucers, and studying them long enough would confirm his hypothesis.
That is monumentally stupid,
Annabelle says, putting words to my thoughts.
Everyone says that until they see the truth for themselves,
Thomas argues, still looking up. I bet he's been on the receiving end of that insult more than a few times.
We just summon magic lights. What's so far-fetched about multidimensional aliens? Or thinking that they are one and the same?
Annabelle is about to reply with her own retort, some kind of comeback to answer Thomas's point. He has a knack for saying things that make perfect sense while making no sense at all. I guess that's part of the genius of his show and the whole appeal. If that kind of conspiracy theory were sold as thought exercises, I might be tempted to jump on board, but probably not. He has a point, I say, interrupting Annabelle before she starts. Not about aliens, that's nonsense. But Petunia and Fred have been gone a while. I know it sounds ridiculous, but we don't know that time works the same way where they went. They did get abducted by magic dancing lights. I think that, at this point, anything's on the table.
Even aliens?
Thomas asks, a ray of hope in his voice. Except aliens. With that, I push myself up from my seat at the counter. The room should be spinning a lot more. Mother knows I've sat drinking for hours back in my school years, only to stand up and almost fall flat on my face. This is in the same vein, except instead of pure inebriation, it's a mix of being tired and drinking hot alcohol too fast. I heroically catch myself on the counter. Okay, we're gonna need some food. And water. Lots of water. Annabelle comes over to help steady me, but I wave her off.
Oh no,
she says sarcastically.
Wherever are we going to get food?
I think I can rustle something out without too much effort. I smile. It's good to have hope and purpose again. But Thomas's mood seems to be going in the opposite direction. Deep worry lines crease his forehead as he seems deep in thought.
Them,
he says cryptically.
How are we going to find them?
What do you mean?
Annabelle answers.
At the clearing. That's where they vanished.
The lights disappeared from the cafe, 45 minutes ago? Take another 10 minutes to get everything together and get going. Then another full half hour to get to the clearing? We're over an hour from them reappearing when we get there.
All the more reason to hurry, Thomas, I yell back from the kitchen as I fill my bag with plastic containers from the fridge. Chicken salad, pudding, leftover strudels, as many water bottles as I think I can carry, and then a couple of bottles of orange juice. For the vitamins.
If they're conscious and can walk, they'll have moved,
Thomas insists.
If they're disoriented, they'll be lost. We can't just go to the clearing and assume they'll be sitting there waiting for us. We need a way to search the whole area. We need helicopters. We need a bunch of people to canvass the forest. We need
dogs, I say, interrupting him.
We need dogs.
No. Richard Daniel Pickering is having none of it. It might have to do with our showing up at the crack of dawn. The current light is the very essence of dusk, purples from the last vestiges of night being erased by the oranges of the rising sun, resulting in a monotone gray that swallows every shape and edge from the world. I know I'd be a little annoyed with anyone knocking at my door at this time of day. But, much like Mr. Pickering, I would already be awake, showered, and ready to face the day. I have a shop to open and baked goods to prepare. Richard runs a farm. If only by force of habit, of course he's bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, but that doesn't mean he's happy to see us.
Please,
I beg.
They could be in danger. This could be a matter of life and death.
And I'm not exaggerating either. The weather has gone colder, and what was an invigorating crisp bite has become a paralyzing, bone-deep freeze. On the walk over, we stepped into puddles that had a frozen crust of ice over chilled water. The surface cracked and broke, a fitting accompaniment to the clouds of billowing condensation with each of our breaths. If Petunia and Fred rematerialized wearing light coats, thirsty and starving, they won't have much time before hypothermia sets in. We might have gone through all this only to find frozen corpses, and frankly, I don't think I can take that. Not after everything else.
What do you think I am, Miss Dufour? The local forest ranger? Kids walking up and down my field every fall, making all sorts of noise at night? If they get lost, it's not my job to find them.
They're on your property,
Annabelle protests with all the vim that I know her for.
They're trespassing, Pickering replies. That doesn't make them my responsibility.
I can feel the rage in Annabelle fighting against the cold. Frustration so raw that it seethes in every aspect of her body language. From balled fists to clenched teeth, she looks about ready to leap at Pickering's throat and rip a piece right out. Instead, she goes for a different type of vital organ.
I hate to be this person, Mr. Pickering, but do you know who my mother is?
I also hate for Annabelle to be this person. It's not a great look on her, but then again, what length wouldn't I go to in order to help my friends? Not to mention that she is far closer to Fred and Petunia than I ever was. I call them friends for lack of a better word. Pete and I kind of hit it off, and while a little distant, I sort of like Fred. Annabelle, though, she goes to school with these guys. She's part of the little cabal that organizes the dances with them. They have years of history I can only guess at. Dropping Mayor Burns' name might be in poor taste, but should she really hold back on that account? No, she shouldn't. Richard Daniel Pickering runs his thick, calloused fingers through the rich silver hair that crowns his skull. I don't know if he's taking the threat seriously or not, or if he even recognizes the mayor's daughter, but he is hesitating, and that's good. Mr. Pickering, I add, using as soothing a voice as I can. This can make the difference between your farm being named as the place nearest where bodies were found and the home of the local hero who saved 2 lives. This is the best thing we can do. I played good cop to Annabelle's bad cop. She offered the stick and I'm presenting the carrot. He knows the pros of helping out and the cons of keeping to himself.
What you decide,
Annabelle adds, perhaps piling on a bit too much,
is going to tell us what kind of man you are, sir.
When Pickering looks up, it's not to meet my or Annabelle's eyes. Instead, his gaze fixates between and behind us to Thomas Sinclair. I hope that perhaps Pickering is thinking back to the pathetic condition we found Sinclair in when he got lost, about how easy it was to go searching for the wayward podcaster. An hour of his time, maybe 2, is all we're really asking. He has to see that.
No,
he repeats.
It's almost light. I'm sure you can find your buddies on your own.
His words are firm and decisive. He wants there to be no further arguments, and the way he moves to close the door tells us the conversation is over. But not for Annabelle. She sticks out her leg, putting her foot in the door as if she's about to sell him a vacuum cleaner.
You can't,
she screams at him. And I can see that this is the straw before last for Richard Daniel Pickering. While placid and quiet, he also cuts a menacing figure. He's built like you'd expect a farmer to be, tall and wide-shouldered. And while his temper seems under control, it's not something I think I want to see him unleash.
Okay,
I say, grabbing Annabelle by the shoulders and pulling her back.
We'll find another way to track down our friends, but please, Mr. Pickering, if you change your mind.
Call me,
Thomas interrupts, handing Pickering his card.
We won't be far.
Annabelle steps back and Pickering reaches out to take the card from Thomas's hand. I can tell the scrap of cardboard is going to end up in the trash, but at least Thomas tried. When the door finally closes in front of us, the clicking of 2 bolts in a chain follows. Farmer Pickering will not be helping us. Annabelle is a ball of indignant anger. The dam keeping my own frustration at bay is also starting to crack. She wants to rage and scream, and I want to do so right alongside her.
Now what?
She demands. But I don't have an answer. I just stand there on Farmer Pickering's porch wondering the same thing. Do the 3 of us venture into the woods and try and find Fred and Petunia on our own?
You know,
Thomas says, with a calm that shows the poor guy just can't read a room.
I was kind of worried about coming here.
Annabelle and my silence isn't the response he was hoping to elicit, but that doesn't stop him from continuing.
I thought the moment we rang the doorbell, that humongous monstrosity, Cerberus's own cousin, was going to run out the door. It's not that I'm afraid of dogs, far from it. Some of my best friends have been dogs. But I'm more of a cat person myself, and—
Wait, I interrupt. Why did you think the dog was going to run out?
It's just what dogs do,
he says.
You ring any doorbell and they have a positively Pavlovian response to it. Normally, I'd assume this means the dogs are really well behaved, but I've seen the rabid beast up close myself. It's not a creature one quiets with words, which means—
He smiles. Thomas Sinclair isn't just spouting random observations, for once. He's leading us somewhere as stupid as it is genius, which is really the most Thomas Sinclair thing anyone could do.
The dogs aren't in the house.
Pickering Farm is, well, a farm. It's not the biggest farm, nothing like those industrial monstrosities you'd find in agrarian states or provinces, but it's not the small family business like Fig's Orchard is either. Besides the wheat fields in the back, there are several structures on the property. There's a large barn and a huge grain silo. There are a few sheds and even a small greenhouse. There's a garage and a large workshop. In short, if the dogs, Dragon and Darling, aren't in the farm residence at the moment, they have to be somewhere else on the property. The 3 of us walk back towards the fields from where we came. It's the route we'd use to either make our way back to Achewillow or to go look for our friends in the woods. However, along the way we make a detour. If I were to keep pets out of the house, but somewhere warm on a morning like this, there's only one place where I'd do it. We make our way to the barn. The sun is only just peeking over the horizon, still painting clouds with orange, but casting blinding light over the wheat fields. This plays to our advantage, hiding our presence as we stray from our predicted path. I'm not sure I know what to expect when approaching the barn. I'm no farmer, and I can't tell if this is the kind used for livestock or farm equipment, hay, grain, or whatever. Are we going to find rows of cows sleeping in stalls or bales wrapped in white plastic piled up to the ceiling? As it turns out, when Thomas opens the small door, we walk into what looks more like a stable than a barn. A large ring with a dirt floor greets us, but I can see stalls in the back where one might keep horses. There's even a small enclosure where a goat stares us down with its creepy eyes. For a few moments, there isn't a sound to be heard. Even our collective breaths are held as we tiptoe through the half-frozen mud to get a better look. The only light is that which filters through the wide windows near the ceiling rafters. I can see the fixtures of powerful industrial lighting, but I'm not sure we want to flip that switch if we find it. "There," Annabelle whispers, her words exploding with sound even at this low volume. I see them, a brown mountain of short fur lying in a corner with a shock of black and white moppish hair laying against it. Immediately, almost as a response to Annabelle's words, one pointy brown ear perks up. Soon it's followed by a flash of white from wet, gleaming teeth. The ground itself seems to shake with the terrible growl of the beast angry for bones to crack and flesh to rend.
"Oh no,"
Thomas says, breaking the silence further. The brown mass unfurls to its full height. Muscular legs, like stilts, stiffen and pull, helping the monster rise. Every inch of the beast feels like a coiled spring, shifting under tight skin. The bark echoes in the empty barn, an assault on the ears and nerves. Its head lowers as the creature skulks around to stand in front of the smaller animal.
Darling?
I ask, the tremor in my voice sabotaging my efforts to soothe. The immense Great Dane whatever mix of a mutt tilts its head in recognition but doesn't seem to back down. It looks like Darling is about ready to pounce, and I have no doubt she could cross the barn in less time than it would take us to exit, when a timid but happy yip breaks through the growl. Dragon, the basset hound, an ever-present companion of Darling, weaves between his counterpart's legs. Ears flopping and tongue lolling, he shuffles to us at top speed, short legs barely up to the challenge. I kneel to greet the overexcited animal, give it a good scratch behind the ears in the hopes that Darling will see that as a sign that we pose no threat, but Dragon runs right past me to paw at Thomas Sinclair's leg instead.
Well, well,
Annabelle says in a nervous, mocking tone.
Look who's popular with the locals.
We've met before.
In what can't have taken more than 5 strides, Darling is also at our side. Mother, that dog is big. Easily the same size as Julia Remington's Oswald. Yet, even at her size, Darling's teeth look disproportionately large. And sharp.
"Oh,"
I say, as the brown giant brings her face to within an inch of mine.
Hi there. My, what big... Never mind.
In an effort to settle our nerves and further ingratiate ourselves to the dogs, we spend a good quarter of an hour petting and scratching them. I don't know that any of us ever manages to completely win over Darling. She periodically reverts back to her aggressive self whenever Dragon drifts too far, but the basset hound is completely charmed by the time we're done. Pulling out some cold cuts from my bag probably helped.
"Now what?"
asks Thomas. He's sitting on the ground, his pants stained by dirt as he rubs Dragon behind his floppy ears, enduring a thorough washing of his face from the dog's tongue.
Now,
Annabelle says, pulling a cell phone from her coat pocket.
we hope this little guy figures out what we want.
She hands me the phone. It's a fancy and expensive one, the kind of phone that will hold 1,000,000 songs. Protected by a fancy black case with gold print logos that have half rubbed off with time. There's still an adapter plugged into the earphone jack, allowing it to pipe music to the amp used at the dances. This is Fred's phone.
Hey, Dragon.
I say, sitting on my heels.
Hey, buddy. Want to do us a favor? Huh? Want to help us find someone?
The hound's tail wags at near supersonic speed as he dances excitedly in front of me. I wave the phone under his nose, letting him get a good idea of the scent. I try to remember the exact command that Mr. Pickering gave his dog when tracking Thomas through the forest, all under the watchful eye of Darling. But I don't need to say anything. Dragon is all too happy to jump to the task. Or at least, it's what I hope. Once Dragon has thoroughly smelled the phone, licking it once for good measure, he immediately bounds towards the door. He paws excitedly until we open it for him and then sprints outside. Thomas is damn near thrown to the ground by Darling as she attempts to keep up with her companion.
Quick,
Annabelle urges, chasing after the dogs. It's no exaggeration either. By the time we step out of the barn, the animals are already a few dozen yards away and only getting farther.
Damn it, this plan is falling apart.
My complaint is underlined by Thomas's less than athletic run and my own hindered race, considering the food and water I'm carrying with me. Annabelle is the only one who makes a decent go at keeping up with Darling and Dragon, but even her efforts are ultimately pointless. Not because the dogs outrun her and disappear into the fields and forests, though there's no doubt they could have done that with ease, but because they don't head there at all. Instead, Dragon crosses the farmyard in a straight line towards the garage. There, he sniffs around the front door in a circle a few times, long enough for us to catch up, before pawing at the door, his nails scratching noisily at the wood in his excitement. Shh. I try to calm him, stealing glances back at the farmhouse. The last thing I want to see is Farmer Pickering peeking from a window. But there's nothing to do about it. I can't imagine why the hound thinks Fred might be in the garage, but there's no convincing the dog to focus on anything else. Perhaps there's food in there, or he's used to being taken for car rides when leaving the barn. The number of possible reasons why he might want access to this particular building far outweigh the possibility that he knew what we expected of him in the first place. I look at the length of the garage. It's big. 3 wide, white garage doors cover the front, and there's a carport that extends from the other end. I don't know if Pickering keeps a small car collection or his farming equipment in there. Regardless, I decide it's better to let the dogs in than have them run around unsupervised and without a leash. It's bad enough that we're trespassing on Pickering's farm, but if we lose his dogs... Fortunately, the door is unlocked, and no sooner is it open than Dragon, followed by Darling, rushes inside. We all follow, listening to their scratching claws and padded paws run across the concrete floor. The place is dark, with only filtered light struggling to make it through the door windows. Shadows swallow the 2 animals whole, an impressive feat when you consider Darling's size. The panting and running fades away, disappearing behind a behemoth tractor and whatever lies behind. Perhaps another farm vehicle, perhaps a sports car covered in a tarp for the winter. Thomas, Annabelle, and I look at each other, all too afraid to make a sound. Ears perked, we navigate a few steps, trying to walk around the huge green tractor. We can hear the dogs, but their panting and scrambling is muffled.
Thomas,
I whisper as softly as I can manage.
Flashlight.
More quietly than I thought him capable, Thomas fumbles through his fanny pack, pulling out his trusty flashlight. He fiddles around with it, struggling to press the button on top through his thick mittens, while we squeeze between the far wall and a chrome grill adorned with leaping deer. When we're finally on the other side of the tractor, Thomas manages to turn his flashlight on and... click. There's a scream, then some shuffling, then another scream. The light from Thomas's flashlight illuminates an empty spot between the green tractor and black SUV. The spot has been turned into an improvised campground. There's a large tent and a Coleman stove not unlike my own. A big cooler is propped up against the side of the tractor with 2 large travel bags leaning on it.
Fred?
I ask, incredulous and not just a little upset.
Fred!
Annabelle sounds even less thrilled than I am. The 2 dogs rush out of the tent, running circles around it while the head of Frederick Ashton pokes out from the flap. Along with that of Petunia Marshall.
What the hell is going on? I ask, indignant.
I can explain,
Petunia mutters, climbing out of the nylon shelter, a sleeping bag wrapped around her shoulders.
Can you?
Annabelle demands.
Do you have any idea what we went through to find you?
There's anger and relief in that question. I can understand. I feel it too, though I probably would have seasoned my words with a bit of confusion too.
Thomas cuts in. I don't get it. Didn't the lights take you?
I'm glad he's the one asking the question and not me, but I think I already know the answer.
No,
Petunia answers.
I mean, that's what we wanted people to think, because no one would look too hard. Who would go to the cops and say anything about the lights? But why?
Annabelle keeps pressing.
Romeo and Juliet, Elaine Dufour and the pastor's son.
At first, Fred and Petunia don't seem to understand what I mean, but it manages to sink in over the course of a few seconds. You're running away together, I add, and the lights are helping you do it because that's what the lights were summoned to do. Fred nods while Petunia turns away, shame writ large on her round features.
I still don't understand why you'd want to run away.
The rage has drained from Annabelle, but it's been replaced by a poignant hurt. The painful jab of betrayal.
You don't understand, Anne,
Petunia explains.
It's already hard enough having parents who are fanatical pilvists.
But my mom can't stand cloud worshippers,
Fred adds, almost as a confession.
We either had to run away or we didn't even have a chance to build anything together.
It's sweet, in a naive sort of way. But it's also delusional and immature. Maybe I come from a bad place on the subject of romance, but I can't see the wisdom in what these 2 are doing.
What if it doesn't work out?
My doubts get the better of me, compelling me to ask.
You're throwing an awful lot away for this, not to mention everyone that gets hurt in the process.
Petunia nods her understanding. I can see in her confident stance and unflinching gaze that this isn't new to her. She's thought about this.
I was going to run away at some point anyways. Pilvinism isn't for me, and I don't think my parents are going to be cool with me picking another path. At least, not right now.
As for me, Fred says, I was going to call Mom and let her know my decision in a week, once we'd gotten far enough. She'd be mad, devastated even, but I hope she'd understand with time. And if it didn't work out, well, that's life. But at least we'd have given it a shot, right? He says right like he's asking my permission, as if I were some grand authority on the subject. It's a really stupid plan, I confirm.
We don't see it that way,
Petunia counters. Of course you don't. They're in love. Stupid teenage love at the worst time in their lives, when they're old enough and smart enough to think they have it figured out, but too young to have the experience otherwise. This is how you end up roommates with a girl who stole your boyfriend. But enough about me.
I guess Pickering is in on it?
Annabelle asks. Another nod.
Why didn't you bring me in on it then? Don't you trust me?
Annabelle is on the brink of tears. Days of worry have taken their toll and made her all the more fragile to the truth that her friends kept such a secret from her. Petunia sees it too. She walks closer, each step an experiment to see how Annabelle will react, until she's close enough to wrap her arms and her sleeping bag around her friend. They reconcile, I hope, while the two dogs paw around them, inevitably trying to join their hug, as dogs will do.
So, Fred whispers, I guess the jig is up?
I look at him and again wonder why he's asking my permission. There's a glimmer of desperate hope in his eyes as he scans each one of us for a sign that perhaps we'll let them get away with it. I turn to Thomas Sinclair. His big, goofy face and tiny eyes immediately twist with confusion.
What?
He asks. I'm not telling, and I bet she's not telling. I point to Annabelle, holding tight to Petunia. Are you? At that, we all turn towards Thomas Sinclair. He holds his flashlight under his chin, like a camp counselor telling a scary story, trying to figure out what it is we're all asking of him.
So, I say, leaning forward on the railing, what are you going to do for your show?
It's early evening at the Anthony Gillard Memorial Arena. The lights are off, save for whatever trickles in from the access corridors, and the seats are, for the most part, empty. Only a few of Achewillow's residents come to the arena when there's no game and no open skating. On evenings like this, however, there's always entertainment to be had, if you're one of those in the know. Thomas chews another bite of his hot dog, the third he's had so far, then munches on a few fries while thinking. There are very few foods that I prefer prepared by someone else. If I want a Wellington, I'll make my own puff pastry and my own duxelle, thank you very much. Hell, if I have a hankering for ice cream, I'm more than willing to wait the few hours and make that too. Whenever I eat out, it's either for research or reluctantly out of desperation. Except for junk food. There's something about stadium and arena food that's hard to replicate in a proper kitchen. Whenever I try to make hot dogs and cheap burgers, they always end up tasting so much better than what I can find at places like this. And for some strange reason, that makes them less appealing. Once it crosses the line into gourmet territory, it stops being junk food.
I don't know, Thomas admits. I can't just tell bits and pieces of the story, no matter how much I alter it, but I also can't tell the whole thing without,
betraying an oath, I finish for him, stealing some of his fries.
Yeah, and look, I'm a lot of things, but a betrayer of oaths is not one of them. Hate to write the whole trip off as a loss, though. People donated to the show expecting me to bring back something.
I nod, knowingly. It's strange to admit, even to myself, but I've grown to better understand who Thomas Sinclair is. I can't say I'm fond of his company quite yet, but part of me wants him to hang around for a while. At least long enough to tease the story of Ghost Moose out of him.
I also can't bring myself to go home without doing something for the widow Remington. At least apologize. Get her a fruit basket or something. If I'd known.
He takes a bite of his hot dog rather than finish his sentence. I marvel at how he can fit such a laden piece of food into his mouth without unhinging his jaw. Practice, I guess.
Don't worry about Julia Remington. I'll figure something out. I don't know what, but we managed to reverse engineer summoning the Donselites. I'm sure I can come up with a solution for an upset ghost.
Mouth full and spitting relish and mustard at the seats below, Thomas can't keep himself from adding his 2 cents.
You'll want to be careful, he warns. That thing looked like a full-blown spectral apparition with definite poltergeist characteristics, and...
But he trails off. I'm not listening, and he notices. Or it's the unexpected wisp of wind that travels through the rows of seats and tickles our spines that distracts him. The lights, low as they are, seem to dim, and a few sparks explode from the overhead large screens that hang above the ice. It's a warning that the show is about to begin.
What?
Thomas asks, nearly dropping the remaining few bites of his hot dog to the ground.
What's going on?
I smile. It's rare that I can do this kind of thing, but it's one of my favorite moments in life. When I can gift someone a slice of the unexpected and, in some cases, the impossible. Usually, it's something I do through my cooking, and I'm sure if I really tried, I could floor Thomas Sinclair with only minimal efforts in that sense. But as much as he's a man who doesn't so much eat as devour, it isn't food that sates his most voracious hunger.
Well,
I say, leaning back in my seat and propping my feet on the railing.
Since you're going to keep quiet about Fred and Petunia, I figured you needed something else for your podcast.
Etched with concern, Thomas Sinclair, host of Stranger Limits, looks back and forth between me and the ice. I quickly lose his interest, however, as faint, shimmering silhouettes begin to coalesce on the ice below. The scoreboard flashes to life, showing a score of 0-0, and there's the faint sound of a buzzer from somewhere beyond hearing. Take out your camera, Thomas Sinclair, I say, watching his incredulous, delighted face as he leaps up to get a better look at the ghostly players skating through the rink. Game's about to begin. Achewillow is written by J.F. Dubow and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Achewillow to donate. Achewillow has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Achewillow for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Achewillow.